So good evening and welcome to Slooh. My name's Helen Avery and I'm going to be here with you for the next hour, and we are looking tonight at the constellation Boötes. And we've got a lot of stories to tell about Boötes. We kind of started them last week when we looked at Canis Venatici. And sort of a continuation. So the Canaries are open, which is amazing. Our beloved astronomer Paul Cox just told me he managed to get them open. The weather is cooperating, but we may have some wobbles, and we'll see how Canary 1 does. But they are all open. So if you are with us on the space in the space situation room, you should be able to see. Let's have a look. Just want to check that. So we have our main page of the Canary all sky, the Canary 2 wide field, ultra wide field, the deep sky Canary 3, and then the half meters Canary 1. So that's what we're dealing with tonight. So if you just take a peek in one of those tabs at the Canary all sky, you can see, it looks pretty clear. And I was sort of just pondering this image a minute ago and trying to figure out exactly where we're going to be looking tonight. So you can see Ursa Major, or you can certainly see the Big Dipper of Ursa Major sort of up at the top, sort of halfway between the middle and right, sort of nearer the middle really. You should be able to make out the Plough, the Big Dipper, however you know it. And how we get to Boötes from there is normally you say arc to Arcturus, and you're arcing from where, you're wondering? You arc from where the handle of the frying pan, if you call it that, meets the pan itself. I don't know why we say arc to Arcturus. I think we could just say a straight line to Arcturus myself. But if you just follow that all the way down, what's that? About 7 o'clock, I guess. I think that's Arcturus, that bright star there, sort of middle of the all sky, slightly to the right, slightly. It's kind of like slap bang in the middle. That's Arcturus. So I'm just going to put up a couple of things on the main show page so you can see, but I don't want you to miss what's happening in Canary 2, where we're looking at, I've got it, the telescope's pointed to Mu Boötes, so we'll see how that happens. What happens there? Okay, we're having some Slooh art, but we can see there's more than one star there, so we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's put up a couple of images on the main. Here we go. All right, and that's Arcturus we're going to get to in a bit, but I just kind of wanted to point this out. So Boötes is this gentleman here in this picture, if you're looking at that. This is Boötes, and he carries very different weapons and things depending on the stories, and we'll talk about those later. And as you can see, we looked at Canis Venatici, those 2 hunting dogs last week, and they are supposed to belong to Boötes. And then just up above you can see they're arcing from the end of the handle, I see in this particular picture. That makes more sense if you're arcing to Arcturus. That's generally how you get there if you're looking for Boötes, but it's a very obvious constellation. Looks a bit like a kite, you could say. That's how I've always thought of Boötes, as a kite shape. And if you're on Twitter, then you'll know that I put up something this week. It was something that the graphic artist MC Escher said about Arcturus. He's the one who did those cool pictures of the stairs that seem to be leading up and down. But he sort of had a real thing about how we should be able to name the stars as well as we can name the flora and fauna. And he talks about Arcturus being like the basket of a hot air balloon, and this sort of diamondy shape, this kite going upwards as being the hot air balloon itself, and Arcturus being this lovely bright red basket, which I thought was a really lovely way of thinking about Boötes as you're looking at in the sky. But before we miss this beautiful star with some amazing Slooh art, I'm just going to check the ultra wide field, see if that's any better no. Okay, we'll make do tonight. So this is also known as Alcolurops, and I've seen this as described as a triple star, but also as 2 double stars. So I'm just letting you know. The sort of main star is a white main sequence dwarf star, and the name is also means the spear, the staff, the club, the shepherd's crook. I mean, it means basically what's in his hand. And it's, we're not sort of seeing in its full glory perhaps tonight because of the weather, but it's inspired a bunch of people. It's mentioned in June, the series, if you're into that. It's about 121 light years away. So 2 double star systems, or 2 binary star systems, or a lot of information saying it's a triple. And I was hoping we'd get a bit more clarity through the telescopes when we had a look. But that is not to be. Not tonight. However, hopefully we're going to have a lovely one next of Arcturus. That's what we're going to be looking at for the next 10 minutes. Because Arcturus has such a lot of lore around it. In fact, Boötes, the name of the constellation, it's thought that the original name was Arcturus because it's all kind of based off of this main star. I'm just going to see if I can find one that might be okay. So I'm just going to put this in front of Arcturus for a minute if you're on the main page. Arcturus, you can see, is like his knee. And it's the brightest star. It's the 4th brightest star in the sky, and it's actually the brightest star in the northern celestial hemisphere. So that's why it was really, really important. And just want to shoot back to the telescope and see how we're doing. There we go, a bit more slow art. Look at this amazing ray coming off it. I'm just going to check the wide field. Looks like it's having some issues tonight. Oh, no wonder, I've got the Chile ultra wide field set up. Okay, I'll go in and change that in a second. That will be why. Okay, so this is the Canary wide field on Arcturus, so maybe we'll see a little bit of the colour come in. So back to Arcturus. I'm just going to get rid of the picture of the star name so we can look at it for those watching afterwards. Let me just find my notes. It has so many different stories, this particular star, so I just love it. And Arcturus is sort of known as is sort of part of the Greek. I think is Arcto, means the bear watcher, and obviously its position in the sky is near the Great Bear and Ursa Minor that we've talked about before a couple of weeks ago. We looked at those. So he's sort of seen as, this star is sort of seen as like the one that watches the bears. And as I say, that sort of was the name for the whole constellation, and now it's changed to Boötes, which actually means the ox driver. So a different story, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But it really has as I said, such a lot of lore around it. So it's a red giant, by the way, and this is about 37 light years away, which just remember that number because later we'll be talking about how this star was powered to light a fare, and it was because they thought it was 40 light years away. But it's actually 37 light years away, or so they say. So the light reaching us from this star tonight was sort of left Arcturus not long after Ronald Reagan was inaugurated, and shortly before IBM introduced its first personal computer. So give you some idea of how far it's travelled through time, the light, to reach us today. That is how long. So I'm just going to pause a second and see if I can just change the telescope quickly. You might have to refresh your screen as I do this. I don't actually know if it's going to work, so we'll see. To the Canary ultra wide field. There we go. My fault for picking the wrong one. So I don't know if that's going to work because we're doing something a little bit different tonight and we're already running. So we'll see. If you refresh your screen, you might be able to see a change in the tabs. So if you give that a go, I'm going to give it a go. You might have to hit play again. Just so we get more. Let's have a look, see if that works. Yes, okay, there we go. Perfect, great. I'm glad we didn't miss this. Okay, the Canary ultra wide field is now up as a tab. I'm so sorry. So you can see Arcturus there, sort of this beaming almost like cross, which will be relevant later as well. And then there's some Slooh art in Canary 2. Okay, so this star is often called Job's star because it features in the book of Job in the Bible. And the line is, "Canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons," spelt with an O, but sort of interpreted maybe as meaning with a U. And it's since been kind of reworded as, "Canst thou guide the great bear with its trains," because people said, no, it was talking about Arcturus, but maybe it meant Arctur, the bear, the Greek bear, so maybe it was referring more to Ursa Major. So it got changed. But interestingly, in this book I just love, this very old book called Astronomy in the Bible by Lucas Reed, he makes some quite bold but interesting claims, because he says that the one who wrote those words, "Canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons," must have known that the stars were in motion. And that to say such a thing when it wasn't known that the stars were in motion was incredibly bold. Because stars move, as we know, and maybe I can't remember if Dr. Paige Godfrey had one of her shows on stellar motion, but I'm certain she did. So he's saying that whoever wrote this, they wouldn't have known this at the time because they didn't have that kind of knowledge about the stars. So it was very bold of them, and they must have just been going on the word of spirit. So I would argue perhaps that the motion was sort of the apparent motion of the stars through the sky during the night. But anyway, Lucas Reed says no, that whoever wrote that in the Bible was talking about stellar motion. And then he points out, why would you choose Arcturus in particular? It's the fourth brightest star in the sky. Why would you choose it? So then he goes as far, Lucas Reed, to say that the scribe of this part of the Bible must have known a fact that we now know about Arcturus, and that is that it is moving faster than other stars. So Arcturus is known as a runaway star. And it's one that's moving through space with like an abnormally high velocity relative to its sort of surrounding interstellar medium. And it's traveling at about 75 miles a second. That's 270,000 miles an hour. And that's like at that speed, you could get to the moon and back in 2 hours, just to give you some sort of idea. And our sun is traveling about 1/6 of that speed. Although last December there was a star that was discovered that's traveling at 2.6 million miles an hour. So it's all relative. But and this star is thought to be something like 10 billion years old. It's like an ancient star. Although some have said 7.5 as usual. There's sort of these massive estimates, 7.5 billion years, 8.5 billion years. But when you think that the Big Bang was 13.8 billion years, you can get a sense of how old this star is. And our own star, our own sun is, I'm trying not to get this wrong, it's like 4.6 billion years old. So big difference. This is a really, really ancient, wondrous star, and it's moving really, really, really fast. And in fact, Edmund Halley was the first to notice that Arcturus moved compared to the positions that had been recorded by Hipparchus and Ptolemy. So really just like a kind of wondrous star. And it's not moving with like the general stream of stars in the flat disk of our Milky Way galaxy. Instead, it's like cutting perpendicularly through the galactic disk. And it appears to be moving with a group of at least 52 other such stars, and they're known as the Arcturus stream. And I wanted to put up a couple of images to show you that where we see Arcturus now, though the way we see Boötes now is going to look different in some years to come because of this movement. So let me see if I can do this. Okay, let's see if we can get rid of that one. So these are courtesy of Sky and Telescope magazine. Bob King is behind this imagery. So you can see Arcturus in the middle there and Boötes. And it looks like how we see it today, because obviously this was taken just 3 years ago, this imaging. And then in 27,800 AD, it's going to look more like this, because Arcturus looks like it's sort of headed south. So it becomes really, really stretched. And the rest of the stars in the sky kind of look not too different. Coma Berenices over on the right looks like it's changed somewhat. Ursa Major looks kind of the same, although we saw when we talked about Ursa Major that it is slightly changing. But it's really Boötes that looks quite different. And then in many, I'm going to get this wrong, but I can't remember how many millions of years, we won't see Arcturus at all. So I'm just going to close these in a minute, just simply because they're a little messy. And put this one back up. Here we go. I'm just going to check back on the telescopes, because I know that we are going to be shifting in a little bit to something else. But as I mentioned, Arcturus is part of the Arcturus stream, which is this group of ancient stars that move at like a different angle and greater speed than other stars in our galaxy. And it's thought to be the remnants, this stream, of a dwarf galaxy that once collided with the Milky Way. So kind of amazing, just such an amazing star. I was reading today that as it cuts through the galactic disk, it's going to eventually reach like a closest point, the closest approach to our sun in about 4,000 years. But eventually we're going to lose sort of sight of this. So as I said, sort of millions of years from now, there'll be no inhabitants on Earth that will be able to see this star, or at least not with like the naked eye looking up. It's about 100 times more light than the sun, and 200 times more powerful, and we'll talk a bit about this later when it was sort of used to harness the energy. I'm just going to flick through our images and just see what we might be looking at. Okay. So we're supposed to be, I've aimed it at something called the whelps of the hyenas, and it's an asterism that's built around Lambda Boötes. So I just kind of wanted to see if we were going to be able to see that. And I'm assuming that if you look through the Canary ultra-wide field, we are looking at Lambda Boötes. That's the one I sort of focused it on. So we're going to talk about this a bit later, about the relevance of hyenas. This was also known as the female wolves, but there is a group of Theta, Iota, Kappa and Lambda Boötes which together are said to be called the whelps of the hyenas, like the hyena pups, and they're not far from sort of the man outline of Boötes. And then some descriptions I've read have said it's actually the Gamma, Delta, Necker, and then Mu Boötes that we just saw, that are actually that asterism. But it's sort of hard to sort of see it here, and I did kind of wonder how it was going to play out. But that's Lambda Boötes that we're looking at the moment, if you're wondering. And as I say, it's supposed to form this asterism of these hyena pups or female wolves that are relevant to the stories of Boötes, as will become clear in a moment. So I'm just going to see if I can bring up another image of these star. Let's have a look at the star names again. Okay, here he is in the middle. I'm just going to try and enlarge him so we can get a better look. Okay, so as you can see, if you're looking on the main page, Arcturus is down by his knee. We're going to take a look at Necker lately, which is the side of his cheek. We've had a look at Alcalurops, that's his spear, that's Mu Boötes. And then down on his girdle, it's also sometimes called the loins, is Izar, and that's also known as Mizar, and it's got a couple of other names that we'll talk about later, and we're going to look at that. And then Lambda Boötes is sort of round about his arm. And then let me see if I can just also enlarge this one, just eclipse Arcturus for a second. I'll have to turn him off. And that image, by the way, was courtesy of one of our members, JW. he shared it in observations, and I really loved it. So just used it for this evening. So you can see here, this is like an older version of Boötes, and you'll see this is actually referring to Quadrum Muralis, because Quadrum Muralis used to exist as a constellation. It doesn't now, and some of its stars have just kind of been morphed into Boötes. But you may be familiar with the meteor shower, the quadrantids, that are in January, and they come from this area. You can see the Quadrum Muralis at the top, the quadrant that's now, as they've been encompassed in Boötes. So sometimes they're known as the Boötids, this meteor shower in January. But the reason I pull this up is because you'll see the northern crown, Corona Borealis, just on the left, this sort of semicircle of stars just by his spear. And it said that also was part of Boötes. It used to have an arm that came off here, and now this sort of arm's been tucked in and it's just by this spear. But it used to be this arm of his that was pointing outwards. So I just kind of wanted to show you that. And I believe that the whelps of the hyena are sometimes referred to as these stars in his fist up there. So okay, just squeeze him back down, and we are moving on to a galaxy. There are a couple of galaxies that we can see. There are several faint galaxies, but this one we should be able to see. But I'm just going to put up an image of it just in case, because I know we're having a little bit. No, there it is. There it is. I'm just looking through the telescopes. So I'm just clicking through number 3. Let's have a look at the deep sky. Yeah, we can see it there. How's the half meter doing? Oh, not bad. Wow, that's amazing. Oh, that is a better image than I thought we were going to get tonight because of the weather. So I'm really pleased. Okay, great. So this is galaxy 5248. And it's in the constellation of Boötes, obviously. But it's actually part of the Virgo cluster of galaxies. And it actually has its own small group that contains another 2 very faint galaxies. And the group itself is part of the Virgo 3 group. I just kind of wanted to scroll around and see in the half meter, which would be your tab number 5, whether we can see anything else. And I suspect like the wide field would be good for this, but because we're not having like a pristine weather, we might not get the clearest to see it. Maybe if you're looking in Canary ultra wide field tab 3, I mean possibly that little blur up if you sort of follow it like a 2 p.m. Is that 2 p.m. or 1 p.m. almost to the corner in the top right? It's like a little blur beneath the star, maybe. I don't know. The image I put on the main page, by the way, the main show page, should be there. What's going on? I know why I've got behind. There we go. I don't know if you're having trouble with the main show page, but on my page, I'm showing the galaxy, and you can see slight blurriness, again, sort of moving about 2 p.m. Just below that star. I think that is what we can see in the wide field, ultra wide field. I really do think that is. That's one of these faint galaxies, and then there's one sort of more like a 1 o'clock if you head up. It looks like an elliptical galaxy. So there are these 2 faint galaxies. And the Virgo 3 chain, by the way, consists of about 8 groups of galaxies stretched into a chain at least like 40 million light years long by the intense gravitational pull of the Virgo cluster. And this particular galaxy is a spiral, seen at an angle of about 45 degrees. And it's classified as a grand design SAB spiral with a short bar. But actually now we're thinking that maybe it's like a longer bar on one side of it. So it was discovered by William Herschel, who else, in 1784. And we think it's about 55 million light years away. And potentially 120,000 light years across, so it's a bit larger than our Milky Way galaxy. So hopefully you are able to see that in the space situation room, and it's just my screen that's having trouble. Okay. So time for some stories about Boötes, I would think. Let me just bring up the Arcturus. Great. While we're pondering this galaxy. So as I say, there's sort of all these different stories about Boötes. And it's really kind of sort of captured sort of people's imagination. And that's largely, I say, because of Arcturus. Like Arcturus is mentioned in poems. I put one up, I think it was by Walt Whitman, on the livecast page. And it's in sort of movies and Star Trek and Doctor Who and those kinds of things. Passengers, I think they use the power of Arcturus to kind of push them off at some point in that movie. And there's all sorts of chat about people who live, the Arcturians. Edgar Cayce said that the most civilized race in the universe live on Arcturus. He was kind of a New Age spiritualist. And then in The Hitchhiker's Guide, one of the sweetest quotes I've ever read was like, however fast the body travels, the soul travels at the speed of an Arcturian mega camel. So I'm a big fan of The Hitchhiker's Guide. But it is a really lovely constellation itself, Boötes. It's got the Boötes Void, for example. It's very interesting, sort of astronomically, scientifically speaking. It's got many, many exoplanets as well. But it's also this wonderful symbolism. So, you know, Plunkett claims this group of stars was seen as a constellation 6,000 years ago because it was apparently seen at midnight of the summer solstice, standing upright with his head almost touching the pole, a position that Plunkett claims would never have happened again. I have no way of proving whether this was true. I don't know. So I'm dubious, to be honest, about anyone who says that 6,000 years ago people were looking at this exact same formation and pattern and calling it a constellation itself. Who knows? But it has got a lot of attention over the years, presumably because it's nearness to the pole, and that's, you know, whether the pole star was Thuban in Draco and then Polaris in Ursa Minor. It's nearby. But he's had a lot of different names, and we talked about a couple last week as we were looking at Canis Venatici. And one was that, you know, he is the son of Callisto, who turned into the Great Bear, if you remember, and then her son Arcus, sometimes known as Arcturus, sometimes known as Arcto, goes hunting one day and is about to shoot her, and Zeus, I believe, takes pity on them and doesn't want that to happen, so he puts them both in the sky. And Callisto stays as the Great Bear, and Arcturus is turned into Ursa Minor, the little bear. And this is kind of his human form in the sky in that story, supposedly. And we talked about that last week. And then the other was Icarius, if you remember, the Greek farmer and grape grower who was taught to make wine of the gods and then ended up being killed for his wine giving shepherds a hangover. And we'll come back to these in a moment because they are still relevant. But he's also known as the ploughman and the herdsman, because if you remember, you know, as we're looking right now, actually in this arc to Arcturus, if you're looking at the image on the main page, the Ursa Major, the Asterism, is the Big Dipper or the plough, and it was thought that this particular gentleman was maybe pushing the plough, so he was called the ploughman. Sometimes the ox driver, if you remember, Boötes means ox driver, and so the plough would have been pulled by oxen back in the day. So it's thought that he was the one sort of there pushing along the plough, which was being then pulled by oxen, or maybe he was whipping the oxen. I don't know how that worked, but I was kind of surprised about this because Boötes is a spring constellation, and these days ploughing the fields usually happens around kind of December. So I wondered if maybe, ploughing started around 5,000 years ago. So I wondered maybe if it was just different then. Maybe you ploughed and put the seeds in at the same time around spring. So maybe that would be why this would be associated, this constellation, with someone ploughing perhaps. And in line with that, Boötes was sometimes named as the son of Demeter. And Demeter was the goddess of agriculture to the Greeks, and to the Romans that was Ceres. So that's one story of that potentially he could be. So I'm just going to check back in with the images that are coming through the telescopes right now, because I don't want to miss anything. Okay, so coming through in the Canary ultra-wide field, and the third tab is a globular cluster. It's not, it won't be in, I don't think I wouldn't have set it up for the deep sky. Oh wow, look at the Canary half meter. It's fantastic. It wouldn't have been set up in those, so we might have a gap in those, but I know I set it up for 2, so 2, the wide field should switch in a moment. But certainly in 3, you can see this cluster in the middle. So it's 5466, pretty uninspired name, this cluster, and it's pretty faint. Apparently you can only see you can only make out 12 of these stars with like binoculars or something. So not the densest or brightest of more spectacular globular clusters we've seen, but nonetheless, I love globular clusters, so I wanted to put it in there. There's not too many visible or easy to see deep sky objects in Boötes. Although there's a lot going on in there, they're very far away. So this is actually 51,800 light years from Earth, this particular globular cluster, and again was discovered by William Herschel. Interesting fact about this one, it's believed that this cluster is the source of a star stream called the 55-degree tidal stream, which was discovered in 2006. So I'm just flicking back to Canary 2. Oh, actually, it looks good in Canary 2, the Canary wide field, because we've got a bit of a closer look. So I'm going to click a snap of that one for posterity. So Boötes, not only is the ploughman is he known, he's also known as the bear hunter. Sort of in line with that story that we talked about before, where Arcturus almost kills his mother, not realizing it's her. And there's a couple of other stories that seem like more symbolic of teaching of religion, perhaps. And we'll talk about those sort of as together. Certainly, like the old mystic teachings, perhaps. Rather than religious teachings of today, because the old mystic teachings pointed more to this idea of heaven being within, and this notion of ourselves having this immortal, unchanging nature that we're not aware of, like I don't know whether you want to call it the self with a big S, or the divine nature, or truth, or God, or whatever you want to call it. It was thought in the mystic teachings, like that a lot of today's religions are based off of, actually, it was said that it was inside us, and that we just had to become realized, and that it could be done. And we've heard of enlightened and awakened sages today, and there aren't many. Some of us don't believe any exist, but it's certainly that back in the day, they were thought to have existed, and we were all able to reach this point, and the teachings of those were in the stars. So Boötes not only is a bear hunter, but he's known as being a guider to the bears. He guides people to the bears. So I don't know if you remember from our Earth's a Major Life cast, but we talked about the symbolism of the bears, that the North Pole always represents this like unchanging self, like God, truth, heaven, beyond the mind. And the two bears are really symbolic of how to reach this place of like how to access it in ourselves. So just bear with me. I know this might be kind of weird, but so Ursa Major is supposedly the objective mind that you can train in like discernment, and you study wisdom and matures into like kindness and patience and all those good qualities that we think about. But it can never touch the pole itself. It's a circumpolar star. And it doesn't touch the pole. So we have represented by Ursa Minor, whose tail is the pole star, so it does touch the star, is that at a certain stage in our evolution of wisdom studies, we have to kind of let go of what we know and be open to be like a child and just kind of follow intuition. And then we can start to sort of access this part of us that we don't even know about, this high level of consciousness, you might want to call it, instead of just circling around it, because Polaris is in the tail of Ursa Minor, so it is still a circumpolar constellation, but at least it touches truth. So it's supposed to be this sort of teaching about, let go of the objective mind and then move towards your intuition, and then you're getting closer to this understanding of these wisdom teachings. And Boötes comes in there because he's the bear driver, and in some interpretations it's claimed that he is the one who urges us along to come to this realization. He's like constantly like chasing the bear, sort of saying, okay, keep seeking for truth, keep looking for the pole, and you'll get there eventually, even if maybe it's going to take some time and you're still in this objective mind and you haven't quite reached the little bear yet, but keep going. So it's really kind of beautiful, this notion of Boötes being like shepherding us towards heaven, if you want to use that as a metaphor. And indeed, that's his other name. He was known to many, this constellation, as like the Good Shepherd, which I just find fascinating. So I'm just going to take a pause and put up a couple of pictures of him. So I'm just going to take down this lovely galaxy. So you can see here he's carrying a sickle, but he's also carrying a staff. And that was sort of to indicate that he is in fact a shepherd. And then you can see in this one he's carrying a club. I'm not sure what he's going to do with that club. And then over in the one in the we first saw, he's carrying a lance or a spear. So there's lots of sort of different things he's carrying. But a shepherd is certainly one representation of him. So the Arabs saw the North Pole, and I think this is so beautiful, as a sheep pen, like a sheep's fold, or like a flock of sheep kept together. And on the Euphratian star list, Boötes is called the shepherd of the life of heaven. So it's kind of like this pen of sheep is all the saved souls who've gone on to heaven, or have discovered heaven within or something, are there at the pole star. And Boötes is kind of the shepherd, like pointing us there, herding us in, trying to keep us all in there and help us on our journey. And then it sort of ties into what he's keeping at bay are like evil tendencies, and they are the bears. And the bears are also depicted as wolves in some ancient cultures as well. Or angry dogs. In fact, sometimes Boötes was called the barking dog, and Arcturus was the shepherd. The star specifically was the shepherd, and the rest were barking dogs. So I just love this. I just love this idea, and maybe that's where the whelps of the hyenas and the female wolves come in. That here is Boötes, and he's trying to guide everyone to heaven or self-realization, whatever you like to call it. And keep at bay anything that might stop that or might harm that. So I just thought it was a lovely story. And Hafiz, the Persian poet, he was a Sufi, so he was a student of the mystic teachings of Islam, and he lived in the 1300s. And apparently he wrote this about the Shah, who sort of represents the king or God. Thy foes to hunt, thy enviers to strike down, poises Arcturus aloft morning and evening his spear. So in this case, it was that he carried this spear as a weapon to keep at bay anything that stopped this sort of reaching of the kingdom within or the kingdom without, whatever you believe. So it's apparently called the lance bearer, or the keeper of heaven, which I think is a really, really lovely story. So I'm just going to pause a moment there and then switch this up, because we're having another galaxy. This is 5676. There we go. But let's see. I want to look through the telescopes to see how we're doing. So it's looking a little faint in the middle of the ultra wide field. How are we doing in the wide field? You can see it better there in the middle, though weather looks like it's wreaking some havoc with the image on that one. Let's have a look at the deep sky. It seems to be coming through in the middle, and I did set up the half meter. And I feel like I'm looking at the same image as before. Does anyone else get that feeling? I haven't been keeping an eye to see whether it's changed. I mean, they are quite similar. I mean, vaguely, but I'll just keep an eye on. I'm going to keep an eye on tab number 5 and see what's going on. But hopefully, we'll get some imagery come through. And I haven't written down in my notes how far this one is. Otherwise, that would be a good guide for me to know what to expect. What to expect from these images. But anyway, I did steal an image and put it up in the main show page. If you want a glorified look at this particular galaxy. So it's an unbarred spiral, and it's very hard to find. Paul's just let me know that the half meter's been going on and off because of the weather. That would make sense. I was like, wow, that looks exactly like the galaxy we looked at before. Okay, thanks, Paul. Right, and just going to check what he said about the weather. Oh, he said it's just it's been going offline due to high winds, so he's just reopened it. Thank you. It's so great that he's here. So hopefully we'll see something coming through. So anyway, sorry. There aren't many good images of this galaxy out there. I mean, I've struggled to find one. I know I wish I could source it because I feel bad about not sourcing it, but there is quite a lot of information, written information about this particular galaxy, and notably it's asymmetric. That's the biggest thing everyone talks about with this galaxy. I'm just keep on flicking back between them. I'm gonna refresh my screen. As well. Okay. Alrighty. So the spiral arms apparently on the south side of the galaxy are kind of chaotic, whereas the spiral arms on the north side are very well defined, and that's why it's asymmetrical. And also the spiral arms on the south side extend twice as far from the galaxy's nucleus as the spiral arms on the north side. So you might know this, but it's classified as a flocculent galaxy. And as I say, I have put this image. Oh, great! I can see it in Canary 2. And in the wide field, so it's a closer look. And I'm looking at the deep sky. And just clicking again on the half meter. Okay. For some reason, I'm still not sure I'm seeing on the half meter an updated screen. Maybe that's just me. Anyway, so yeah, that is the second of the two most visible galaxies. And it's really coming through now, I can see, on tab 2 Canary Whitefield, so that's great. That's great. Even between the Slooh art. And you can see, it should be back on, but you can see that it was slightly asymmetrical, even from that smaller image that we're looking at. Okay. So another sort of depiction of, it's only just coming back online, says Paul. Okay, I hope I'm great. Okay, thank you. Another depiction of Boötes is that he is Atlas, because of his vicinity to the pole star, which was, as we talked about, considered a bit like the heavens. It was kind of like he must be holding them up. Why he was sometimes called known as Atlas. Paul says to tell, if you're listening as a member, the Canary Islands are now going to be open for the remainder of the night. So if you've got missions booked, hooray, you'll be able to see them. Fantastic. That's great. Thanks, Paul. Thinking of Paul in the Airstream. Up with the sheep. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Okay. So I'm just going to keep an eye on tab number 5. Just to keep an eye on it. And see if we've got another 4 minutes on this galaxy, and then we're actually not going to be using the deep sky or the half meter again. But I was talking about Atlas, so I thought I'd just put up a picture of Atlas, if I can find him. There he is. And thought I'd read you a quick story about him. So Atlas was a Titan, and although in some stories he was the son of a Titan, and he ruled Atlantis. Of course he did. And he had many subjects, and they all became degenerate, so the gods decided to punish them by destroying the entire race. This is one story of Atlas. There are many stories of Atlas. But they sent this great flood that killed all the people and sank the island beneath the sea, that we think now is somewhere around Crete or something like that. We're not sure. And resentful towards the gods at the loss of his kingdom, Atlas led the Titans in the cosmic war. And when the gods won the war, they punished Atlas for his part in it by making him hold the sky on his shoulders forever. So this notion of sort of Boötes sort of being the guide of heaven or upholding the heavens, and if we can sort of imagine both of his hands, if he got his arm back in the Northern Crown, if he got his arm back, he might be sort of, you can sort of maybe imagine him sort of having them both pointed upwards, holding up the heavens. But small fact for you, the celestial globe held by Atlas is sometimes mistaken for the Earth, leading both to the belief that he held the world. Leading both to the belief that he held the world on his shoulders. Not true; it was the heavens, and that's why we use the name Atlas as a book of maps. So it's incorrect. He's not holding up the Earth. He's holding up the heavens, in fact. But that's just another way of looking at Boötes. So he has sort of all these religious kind of tones given to him, like holding up the heavens. Is he the good shepherd? I mean, even one story I was reading about him, we talked about Icarius, and he was taught to change the grapes into the wine of the gods. And some people were saying he was sort of like the predecessor, is that right, to Jesus, that Jesus didn't even need grapes to turn into wine. He turned water into wine, but Boötes maybe was there first, as sort of the initial stages of turning grapes into wine. So it's really kind of interesting, all these different things said about him. I just kind of wanted to read this little bit here. It says, as the bear driver, Boötes scourges the great bear or the objective mind, driving it to seek truth. He is Theseus, imprisoned in the labyrinth of conjecture and opinion, and finding his way out by means of a thread furnished by Virgo, Ariadne. He is Atlas, holding up the heavens, for anything that endures must be founded on truth or fact. And he is Arcus the hunter, who finally discovered that in searching for lasting value, the plough is of more importance than the spear. And he is Bacchus, representing the crown to Ariadne because he loved her. That's another story we'll do another time when we take on the Northern Crown. Boötes extracts value from his experiences, even as the vine he cultivates takes crude elements and turns them into sparkling wine. Jesus, having a more complete knowledge, turns the water directly into wine without the use of the vine at all. So this lovely view of Boötes more holistically as having this sort of role of helping us all get to heaven or happiness or peace or whatever you want to use. So I just thought it was so lovely, and I kind of prefer those stories to him being like the punished Atlas. I'm looking in the half meter right now, and it looks good, but I don't know if that was our galaxy. I can honestly say I don't know. I just don't know. Okay, so we're moving on to our last couple of stars now. So we're looking at, this is, if you're in 2 and 3, Necker, the beta star, and it marks the head of Boötes. And it's about 250 to 350 million years old. So it's a mere baby compared to Arcturus, which was, getting on for somewhere between 7 and 10 billion. And it's thought that Necker was derived from the Arabic name al-Beker, which meant the herdsman or the ox driver. And there's some sort of suspicion that this may have a companion star, but it's not been found. And it's we think it's got a mass about 3 times that of the Sun. And it's sort of ready to become a larger, brighter red giant at some point. So I don't know if we are able to get a good look there, but that is Necker that we're going to be looking at. I'm just going to see if I can bring up the star names again. So there he is. Get rid of Atlas. So you can see Necker is like in his head. It's on his cheek. That is Necker, the beta star. And then up next, we're going to be taking a look at Isar, which is down by the groin area. But he's not the ox, driver and the bear hunter in every culture for sure. It's quite a big Chinese constellation. Actually, it's sort of parts of Boötes and other stars. It's called the Palace of Emperors. So Arcturus was known as the king's throne in that Palace of Emperors, or sometimes the Great Horn. And it was apparently a very important star because it marked the beginning of the lunar calendar in China, as well as it being the brightest star in the northern celestial hemisphere. And interestingly, some of the other Chinese constellations that sort of are made up of the stars of Boötes are the spear and the lance and the club. So kind of interesting that it has sort of some similarities there to these sort of different types of weapons that are always depicted in his hands. In Brazil, this constellation, or part of the constellation, it looks more like a piranha. And then Eskimos are said to sort of, this constellation was important to them mainly because of Arcturus, as indicating the time when seal hunting expeditions took place. So it's sort of the timing. We might have talked about this before, the timing for them on those hunts. And there are some that say that some of the stars represented a net, a fishing net. And ancient Polynesians used Arcturus to help guide them towards Hawaii when they're paddling in their canoes. And then we talked before about Arcturus making up part of this much larger constellation for some of the first peoples in North America of the giant chief in the sky. I don't know if you remember that story that we told, but I believe Arcturus was part of his arm, part of the giant chief's arm. Okay. So, not a man everywhere. And at some point, we'll really dive into the Chinese constellations. They're so different and kind of fascinating. And then sometimes you get such an overlap with the Greek and Roman stories and Egyptian stories too. And there's talk about this constellation as, the usual pyramids were built with Arcturus in their sites, that kind of thing. I just can't find any facts around that. They're in all these old astronomy books, but they're just sort of these throwaway sentences, and so I'm just sort of reluctant to talk about it being that case. And some people have claimed that Boötes is maybe something to do with Osiris, but it felt like it's shoehorned in a bit. I didn't really. I mean, the reasoning they said was because he loses his limbs. He's lost an arm, and so they said it was like Osiris when he was pulled apart. If you remember that story, he was pulled apart so he can never be put back together. I felt that was a bit of a stretch, but certainly we know his roots as being a shepherd, an ox herder, and bear hunter, bear driver. So we're moving on to our final star of the night, and then I've taken the liberty of booking Arcturus again at 10 p.m. And that's because I just wanted, to sort of leave you, actually, to sort of not talk, so you can sort of look at Arcturus. It's the brightest star in the northern celestial hemisphere, and it's the fourth brightest. It won't always be around. I mean, we'll be long gone by the time we can't see it. But it's really, as I say, sort of it captured imagination. And in 1933, when the World Fair was held in Chicago, it was thought that Arcturus was 40 light years away. Remember I mentioned earlier it's 37. So the last time that Chicago hosted the World Fair was in 1893. So it was 40 years previously. So they had this great idea to light the fair with the light from Arcturus itself. And this is in 1933. And so it's what the organisers did. Edwin Frost, a retired director of the Yerkes Observatory in Wisconsin, he came up with this idea to focus the light of Arcturus onto a photocell and using the electric current generated to flip a switch that would turn on the lights at the fair's opening. And there is this amazing old audio of a radio program about the event. And so what I thought I'd do is at 10, I'm just going to hit play. I don't know how it's going to work because it's a really old recording, and I'm going to try and run it off my computer through the mic. So we'll see. And then it will just play until the live cast ends at 10:05 or 10:06. That's what I've booked it for. So I kind of wanted you to sort of have that sense of, you could look at Arcturus and think about, as I said, its light left when IBM was introducing its first PC. But it also was, inspired this whole wonderful event, the Chicago Fair. And if you want to listen to the whole audio and you don't want to stick around for it, it's in Illuminations. You can search under Arcturus or Boötes, but I've also put it to the top. So if you just click on Illuminations, you should see it. And there's actually quite a lot of posts about Boötes and Arcturus in there. Because it is like one of those really popular constellations. So if you're interested, certainly take a look. And if I have time tomorrow, I'm sure I will, I'll put up a list of other objects. There are some like cool triple stars and double stars. It's a quadruple star. I don't know how you say it, but it's XI Boötes. And a lot of these are called just Boo. So XI Boo, like Moo Boo was the first star we saw tonight, which is kind of cute. And any other things that I think of that are worth you seeing. If you're interested, you can book missions this week and have a real look around Boötes, so that when you go out and have a look up in the sky, you feel really familiar and maybe recall some of the stories as well. And you can also watch this later on YouTube. It will be up as well. So I'm just going to put up a couple of screens to leave you with, as if you're oh, I was going to leave that one. These. Here we go. Here are just some of the pictures of the World Fair. I think we're switching over now. Let me see. But we're just taking if you're in tab 3, we're just taking a final look at Izar or Mizar. It's also called Pulcherima, which means the loveliest. And this has a story of its own, which I will put up this week, which is fascinating because it was said that there was some sort of message that came from Epsilon Boötes, which is the star that we're just ending with now. Epsilon Boo, it's also called. But there was a Scottish astronomer who claimed that that we got a message with a star map that came from this star, although then he changed his mind and now he sort of changed it back. But he's a fascinating guy called Duncan Lunan, if ever you're interested in Googling him. But I'll put that up in Illuminations this week because it's a really cool story about like a bit of a random star. I mean, it's still a great star, Epsilon Boo, but here we go. This is Arcturus, and I'm going to leave you with this audio if I can get it to play. And I will keep you posted about next week. It's possible I might be on the road, but I always know by Tuesday or Wednesday, so I'll put something up in the community board of whether that is happening or not and what we might be looking at. I'm feeling the Northern Crown coming on. We haven't done a zodiacal constellation for a while, so we could be doing Libra. If you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them, so post them up in the community room, on the community board, and let's see how this goes.
Chicago's Century of Progress Exposition was opened on the morning of May 27, 1933. Just before 9 o'clock on that evening, the fairgrounds were illuminated for the first time, the switches being thrown by a ray of light from the in the court of the Hall of Science before a vast throng, and was recorded at that time. Through the courtesy of the late Rufus C. Dawes and of Philip Fox, now director of the Museum of Science and Industry, the records were loaned to the Arcturians, and this re-recording was made in 1940. You have doubtless already recognized the strains of the Pomp and Circumstance March, which was being played by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Dr. Frederick Stott conducting. President Rufus C. Dawes follows immediately. Exposition, we celebrate both the achievements of the century and the extension of the limits of human knowledge. In our ceremonies this evening, we recall one of the greatest achievements of Chicago during the century, and we do it in a manner that demonstrates the advance that men have made in scientific knowledge. We shall recall the great Columbia Exposition of 1893. Never will its beauty be surpassed. Never will its value to the city be exceeded. It was for Chicago a great triumph. We remind ourselves of that triumph tonight by taking rays of light that left the star last they have reached us. We shall use these rays to put into operation the mysterious forces of electricity, which will make light our grounds, decorate our buildings with brilliant colors, and move the machinery of our exposition. In every step we behold the marvel of man's genius, and illustrate the progress made by man during the century in using the forces of nature for his comfort and convenience.